All right, so is Japan still worth the trip with everything going on? Like what with these exchange rates and tourism taxes? We've got a ton of news articles and expert opinions all about this.
It's really interesting because it looks like Japan's facing some serious economic problems right now.
Okay, yeah.
And the yen is like surging, which is really affecting people's travel budgets.
Yeah, I was in Japan not too long ago, and I remember thinking like grabbing a bowl of ramen was like no big deal.
Right.
But with how the KRW JPY exchange rate is right now,
Oh, yeah.
it's at its highest point in like over 20 months.
Wow.
That same bowl of ramen is going to feel a lot more expensive.
Yeah, you're right. It's a big deal. And just last year, you would get 100,000 KRW more
Yeah.
for 100,000 yen than you do today.
Right?
Like, think about that.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you want to get a Japan Rail Pass, right? For 29,110 yen
Right.
last year, that would have cost you about 290,000 won.
Right.
But now it's going to cost you more, like 320,000.
Whoa.
So that's a big difference.
That's huge. Yeah, that could be like a couple of museum entries,
Yeah.
maybe even another meal.
Right.
And, our sources were saying that if the exchange rate goes over 1,000 KRW for 100 JPY,
Oh,
it could trigger a sense of loss for travelers because they're losing so much purchasing power.
exactly.
They're forced to think about those trade-offs.
Yeah, it seems like this is starting to show up in the way people are traveling.
Uh-huh.
Because while Japan's still a really popular place to go,
It is.
travel agencies are saying that they're seeing less people booking trips.
Really?
Like families who used to think that going to Japan was pretty affordable are having to reconsider.
Yeah, because it's just not as affordable.
Right.
It's not how it used to be.
Yeah, and it's not just the exchange rate either.
Right. There's other stuff, too.
Yeah.
Like, our sources are also talking about how there might be a tourism tax hike, and that could go from 1,000 yen to 5,000.
Whoa.
And then on top of that, there's local accommodation taxes that are going up, too. Yeah, like Kyoto, they're considering raising their accommodation tax by like 10 times.
What?
Yeah, so that could be an extra 10,000 yen,
Oh, my goodness.
which is like almost 100,000 won added to your hotel bill.
Wow.
So, when you add all these rising costs together with the strong yen, it really makes people think twice.
Yeah, for sure.
But, it's not all bad news, right? Because Japan still has a lot to offer.
Mm-hmm.
It's close by. There are so many different regions you can visit.
Yeah.
And the prices there are actually pretty reasonable compared to some other popular places.
Right. That's what makes this whole thing so interesting, because you've got these rising costs that are making people think twice about going.
Right.
But then you've got like the magic of Japan.
Yeah. And we can't forget that the travel industry is also doing what they can to keep up with everything.
Yeah, they're trying.
So what are they doing?
Well, they're saying they might promote lesser-known cities in Japan
Okay.
and then offer better travel benefits.
Okay.
And then just focus more on what makes Japan so special. So they're trying to find ways to make Japan appealing, even with these money problems.
I mean, promoting the lesser-known cities.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that risk getting rid of what makes Japan so unique? Like, how do they balance that?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one for them to figure out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about finding those hidden gems that aren't full of tourists, but also keeping what makes Japan, Japan.
Right. I feel like this whole yen surge is really behind all of this.
Yeah, for sure.
And our sources mention that this is related to expectations for an interest rate hike by the Bank of Japan.
Okay.
And I know a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with this, but could you just explain how a possible rate hike would affect the yen and people's travel plans?
Well, the Bank of Japan's thinking about raising rates to try and control inflation.
Okay.
And that's attracting investors who think that higher interest rates are going to make Japanese assets a good investment.
Okay.
And so this higher demand is increasing the value of the yen.
So basically, if the Bank of Japan does end up raising rates, the yen could go even higher.
Exactly.
And that could make people even more hesitant to go.
Right. Especially if they're on a budget.
Yeah.
Because it would make other places seem more affordable.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Starting with a strong yen and then affecting travel trends and tourism strategies and even individual travel budgets.
Totally. And there's another part to this.
Okay.
The Korean travel deficit.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
A strong yen could actually help reduce that deficit because it might stop people from traveling abroad as much.
Oh, wow. So it's all connected.
It is.
Tourism, exchange rates, even interest rates.
It really shows how global economics works because everything is tied together. Even small changes in one place can affect everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah, a strong yen might make Japan more expensive.
Right.
But it could be good for the Korean economy as a whole.
Yeah. Okay, so just to sum up the yen is rising travel costs are going up, and the travel industry is trying to figure out how to deal with all of this.
Yeah.
But is Japan still worth the trip? I mean, it's not a simple answer, is it?
No, it really isn't. And that's what we're going to explore in this deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at everything going on, all the possibilities, and what it means for travelers like you.
Sounds good.
It's easy to get lost in all the economic stuff,
Right.
but we can't forget about the human side of things because it really comes down to each traveler and whether the cost is worth it for the Japan experience.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Like all the numbers and analysis aside,
Yeah.
it's really about personal experience.
Yeah, our sources actually had some interesting stories from travelers about this.
Oh, yeah, like the one where that person felt like they were losing money because of the exchange rate.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge emotional response.
Yeah.
And it really shows how people's perceptions are changing. Like, Japan might still be really cool, but people are starting to feel differently about whether it's worth the cost.
It's like when your favorite restaurant raises their prices.
Yeah.
The food's still good,
Right.
but you can't help but think about what you used to pay.
Totally.
And that's so important for the travel industry.
Uh-huh.
Because if people don't feel like they're getting their money's worth,
Right.
they'll just go somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to how the travel industry is trying to adapt.
Oh, yeah. So our sources mentioned a few things they're doing to try and keep Japan attractive.
Right.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, one thing is they're trying to move the focus away from those really popular tourist spots
Okay.
and promote some of the lesser known places, like smaller cities that maybe aren't as crowded and offer a more authentic experience.
Yeah, and probably less expensive.
Right.
So it's like finding those hidden gems.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, do you think that's enough to make up for the rising costs?
It's a good start. But they're doing more than that.
Okay.
Like they're also trying to enhance the whole value proposition.
Okay.
Like they're trying to offer more all-inclusive packages
Oh, right.
or include some unique experiences or give better travel benefits.
So it's not just about making things cheaper.
Right.
It's about making the experience feel more valuable, even if it costs more.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's switch gears a little.
Okay.
Our sources also talked about the Korean travel deficit
Right.
and how a strong yen could actually be good for Korean businesses.
Right. So a strong yen actually helps Korean exporters
Okay.
because it makes their products more competitive on the global market compared to Japanese products.
So even though a strong yen might make travel more expensive,
Yeah.
it could actually be good for the Korean economy in other ways.
Right. It's all connected.
It is.
Yeah. And it shows how important it is to think about the bigger picture
Uh-huh.
when we're talking about whether or not Japan is still a good place to visit.
Right. It's not just about the plane ticket or a bowl of ramen. It's about all these economic forces that are affecting our decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, so to recap, we've talked about the strong yen,
Yes.
the rising travel costs,
Uh-huh.
what the travel industry is doing to try and adapt, and even how all this affects the Korean economy.
Uh-huh.
So what does this all mean for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be informed.
Okay.
Like, if you understand what's going on,
Uh-huh.
you can make better choices about your trips.
Right.
Like where you go, how much you spend,
Yeah.
or just your expectations in general.
So being in the know is really important when it comes to traveling these days.
Yeah, especially with a place like Japan.
Uh-huh.
It's like at a turning point.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how all these travel trends could change tourism,
Right.
not just in Japan, but all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're seeing economics, traveler preferences, and industry changes all interacting. And it's going to have a big impact on how we travel in the future.
So what can our listeners do to keep up with all these changes?
Stay informed and be flexible.
Okay.
Do your research, know what's happening,
Uh-huh.
and don't be afraid to change your plans if you need to.
And, travel is about having those meaningful experiences. It's
Right.
not just about checking things off a list.
Yeah.
It's about interacting with different cultures, seeing new things, and being open to new possibilities.
Exactly. And that brings us to an important question for our listeners.
Okay. So after hearing all of this, where does Japan actually fit in with people's travel plans?
Right.
Is it still that place that you have to go to?
Mm-hmm.
Or are all these rising costs going to make people go somewhere else?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's no right answer.
Mm-hmm.
It really just depends on what you're looking for and your budget and what's important to you when you travel.
Right, because for some people, Japan might just be so amazing.
Yeah.
That they're willing to spend more.
Yeah.
Like maybe they'll buy fewer souvenirs or stay in cheaper places to make it work.
Exactly. And then for others, this might be what makes them think about going somewhere else, like Southeast Asia with all those good travel deals, or even different places in Korea.
It really makes you think about how all these travel trends are going to change tourism.
Right.
Not just in Japan, but everywhere.
It's pretty interesting, right? Like we're seeing how economics, what travelers want, and what the industry does all mixed together. And it's going to affect how we travel all over the world.
So what can people do to keep up with all of this?
Just stay informed and be flexible.
Okay.
Do your research, understand what's happening.
Right.
And don't be afraid to change your plans.
Yeah. And remember, travel is about having those cool experiences. It's not about a checklist.
Right.
It's about seeing different cultures, learning new things, and being open to whatever comes your way.
Exactly. And so that brings us to a really important question.
Okay.
So when you're planning your next trip, think about this. Where does Japan fit in now? What's important to you? What kind of experience do you want?
Right.
And be open to finding new and exciting places.
Okay.
That might be just as cool, but easier on your wallet.
So yeah, a strong yen and higher travel costs are definitely big news. But in the end, it's your choice where you go and how you travel.
That's right. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Of course.
And happy travels, everyone.